time. So there's a couple of questions. Why don't we start with this one? This one's one from a listener who's listening, who has listened to the last two parts, and he wants more
Sure.
detail on. Can you explain what happened to Venezuela? Why are they in the mess they're in?
Venezuela's in the mess they're in because of basically a socialist dictatorship came in. I mean, they had a really strong commodity industry in Venezuela, as you know,
Yep.
oil and gas, and they started borrowing and borrowing over and above. Do you hear me?
Yep. Yep.
Oh, so Venezuela started borrowing and borrowing and got into really heavy financial debt. And what happened is their commodity industry crashed. They started trying to bully some of their foreign counterparts, investors, and they lost their industry. And you know what happens, just like what's going to happen with Alberta if we keep it up, is they're a country, and when they lost that commodity industry and it devalued their GDP so greatly, and I mean it went down about $175 billion a year GDP is what was lost. And when you can't service your debts, the government kept printing money, right there, central bank, to try and give everybody money to spend, but the money wasn't worth anything until eventually people just threw it away in the streets because it wasn't worth anything. You couldn't buy anything because there was no value there, right? And that's what happens to all countries, and it's not just Venezuela. There are other examples, not in oil, but that is the example that Alberta really has to watch, even though we will be with Canadian currency, and it won't affect the entire country as much as it's going to affect Alberta itself. But even a very large dip in our currency would be terrible. Everything becomes more expensive, all imports. Like, you couldn't even, Venezuela couldn't import anything, which, they produce oil, but they couldn't afford to import anything. And that's where you see there's no food on the shelves and all of that, right? And that's what happened to Venezuela. When you devalue your currency and you kept printing and printing, even though instead of, nobody would give you any world loans because you couldn't even pay back the ones you had.
So, Dave, what would you say to somebody who uses Venezuela as an argument against separation? If what I can envision them giving the following argument: if Alberta was an independent nation who was heavily or not influenced, but heavily into commodities such as oil and gas, the way we are, with the oil prices in negative values or very low values, would we not be in the same mess as Venezuela? And is the only thing protecting Alberta right now is the fact that we're part of Canada?
It's actually the opposite. That is true, and that seems to be the narrative of the federal government right now. And for many years now, it's you're going to supply us so much money in this equalization and centralization, whether you like it or not. We will make your province borrow until you achieve that for us, the whole. And if you don't like that, go ahead and leave because your outstanding debt servicing, you'll be landlocked. But we already are landlocked now.
Right.
Doing nothing. Yes, we will have a stronger currency in Canada right now in the situation, but you're not going to. Basically, they're going to rob Alberta of its talent, its pool of people that it's built up and educated. It's going to get robbed into other provinces subsidized by Alberta. So we could do nothing. And this comment, this question or concern, I'm not sure what you call it, they are right. Technically speaking, Canada would stabilize a currency, a lower currency, but Alberta's going to continually go into debt to make Canada stronger regardless. You can keep borrowing it, and yes, the whole of Canada is still going to be held together, even though that provincial debt, like anything, goes into the pot as well as all Canadians and some viable industries that I don't think will be so viable in the years to come.
No.
Now, yes, it's a bigger thing right now. Canada would give us that cushion for a number of years, but it won't last at the rate we're going. It just won't. Now, if we left, right, yes, we're going to have trouble with those commodities, but in international law, if we join the UN, which I wanted to get into that with you,
Yeah.
and I know everybody cringes as soon as they hear that, but they're very misled by our government from both the right and left. And don't kid yourself, they want everybody blaming the UN instead of looking at it. What it really is that we're actually in breach of the UN. We've gone rogue with member states, which there are 193, and we've gone rogue, and we're breaking those binding laws. Now, if we separate and we commit to the binding laws, not non-binding laws, it will be Canada who would face sanctions. Would the road be tough for Alberta in those first few years? Yes, it would be. But I believe that a lot of international investors and people who bring the money forward, knowing that we would be in a different set, or we're going for those laws and we're negotiating with Canada, that we'd actually be protected in that 4-year transfer. And that's why I designed the 4-year transfer, because it still allows all the protections. It's like a Brexit deal.
Mm-hmm.
And we would have a deal with Canada where we'll make a deal, but these are the things we're going for. And should they say, no, we're not going to honor those international laws and allow you to do that, or they're going to make it so all these provinces get a vote to vote whether we stay or go, when we're clearly being politically, financially oppressed in Confederation. I believe that the investment community, knowing that we were going for that, knowing that we would become a UN member state, we would get that money, we would get that buffer. We wouldn't just be crucified. Separation is not an overnight thing. There is a 4-year transfer period where all those buffer protections, where we decide how much with the federal government, how much we're going to owe them, and how much shared debt we have to share, as well as the asset settlement. I had a number for that, which is not outlandish as people think it would be. It was actually only $69 billion according to 2019 of the 2017 and 2018, but that number's gone up a little bit, not extremely, but it's also against asset value and things that Albertans have invested in, and we get our equal share of that as well against debts. So it's not quite what everybody thinks, and of course with First Nations, but that
Yep.
4-year transfer is why, is because that's what's required in negotiation with the Canadian system, as well as the international community wants to see us give it that try before they're willing to step in and say, look, Canada's not being unhonorable in this settlement. They're making it impossible. It is clearly oppression, and these people want freedom, and the law of sovereignty will come forward. We will see those binding 5 implement the sanctions should they have to, and they will, and they have, and there's a clear track record of this. We will not go belly up like everybody thinks. Is there a considerable amount of debt that Alberta would have to take? Yes, but then there's a considerable amount of savings as well.
Well,
Plus, we're going to get investors who are going to look at it that now Alberta's going to get the fair treatment as a UN landlocked state. And you can look, there's 52 of them in the world, all registered UN states, which a lot of well-developed ones are doing tremendously well. So we wouldn't be bankrupt like everybody thinks. It's not an overnight where we crash. We have a 4-year buffer, and we also will have a considerable tax savings, time to build our military, set up our structure, and this is the 4 years where we get everybody working on what the Constitution's going to be, what the system of government's going to be, not first, that's much later. That's after we get a referendum and we start the process and we pass that referendum. So people think that it's some kind of overnight process. It's never going to be that way. It was never ever shared out to everybody that it would be that way. It would have to be a deal situation with the federal, and we could do it. We wouldn't be crashed overnight and in some kind of poverty that Canada's trying to scare us into now and try to put that forward. It doesn't work that